Hello, gardeners. It's National Invasive Species Awareness Week. And so today my feature plant is going to be the Japanese barberry that's inhabiting this hillside in a local park. This is usually a plant that's easy to locate because usually it has berries on it in the late fall. But here it is, we're in Maryland and we're at the end of February, beginning of March, and all the berries have been consumed by birds and mice and various mammals and things. But usually that's an easy plant to find, and we're going to look at it up close. It has tons of spines on it, which makes it another super easy way to find it. But you might be wondering, like, it's capable of dense stands. Why would it be in this hillside where it does not really have a dense stand per se? One of the reasons it probably doesn't have a dense stand in this location is the fact that this is heavy shade. We're in the middle of a woodland with all kinds of tulip poplars and some beech trees, and obviously a slope, and there's dry habitat, and yet these Japanese barberry plants are thriving. So that just goes to tell you why it's become such a popular ornamental in the United States. Very adaptable. And you can find it sold at nurseries. And we're going to talk about why in Maryland it has to be sold with a sign on it that says this is an invasive species in the state of Maryland. It's labeled as a Tier 2 invasive. And if a landscaper were to plant this in a homeowner's yard in Maryland, they're required by law to give them a list of invasives with the Japanese barberry listed on there. So here it is, full shade, and this park is loaded with deer. And what do you see? Nope, no deer chewing on this one. So the spines are keeping the deer off. So not only is there a problem with this plant that it's taking out space where native plants would be living, but there's even more problems that you don't even see. Inside the soil, underneath of this plant, there's microbial activity occurring. One thing that happens, there's research that's been done all up through the Northeast. Did I tell you it was introduced to the Arnold Arboretum through seeds back in 1875? But underneath of this plant, the nitrates tend to be more concentrated, which increases nitrogen in our environment, which could then, in turn, pollute our waterways. That would be one. Second factor that occurs in the soil is the pH tends to go upward. So that changes. And another thing they've noticed is there's less leaf litter underneath of a Japanese barberry. They believe that that's what researchers have done at the University of Connecticut, have confirmed that there's more earthworms being an invasive species, especially in the Northeast. They were not native there. And they're consuming the leaf litter and making castings and making the sediment more mobile for runoff. So that's another factor that's changing the biological activity around these plants. And then the other big one is, and maybe all of you already know this, the white-footed mouse enjoys the habitat underneath of this Japanese barberry. You can see it's got about a 4-foot wide area that it's covering here, and it's about 3 or 4 foot tall. Those mice like to hide underneath here, probably also consuming the seeds, and they are the vectors that carry the spirochete in which the tick gets the disease. The black-legged tick, which we all fear because we don't want it on us because we have the potential to get Lyme's disease. So where there are lots of mice, there tend to be these ticks that contract the disease, and then the tick gets on the white-tailed deer, and that spreads the disease and the tick throughout the park areas. So another reason why we don't want Japanese barberry in our woodland. Come on over, let's take a look and learn how to ID it. The foliage, it is deciduous. Let's take a look here. It's actually covering this hillside. You can't really see too well, but over on the hillside over there, there's barberries over there. And I remember Dr. Baker in college calling it the trash can plant because you can see on this one, look how many leaves and trash it accumulates. And it's a great barrier plant and hedge plant. That's why it's become a popular plant in people's gardens. So how do you identify it? Let me give you one tip for one thing that's super easy. Look at the color of that. I did a split on it. Here's the bark. Here's the inner wood. Yellow as yellow can be. I wouldn't doubt that it could be used for a pigment, for a dye of some kind, but that's a dead giveaway. Of course, the spines itself are a dead giveaway. So then I made this little worksheet for all of you. It has these little tiny red berries. There's a view of those. And then there's lots of spines on the stems. And the foliage is really small. I got kind of a zoom. Hopefully you can see the leaves there. Little tiny, usually they're 1 inch to 1.5 inches in size. And very adaptable, as I said, a very adaptable plant, not one. So what you would probably be thinking, well, what can we do to control it? I yanked these out of the ground. You can see these little smaller ones. So I was able to grab these and pull them up. They're very shallow rooted plants. So that's certainly one option, to come around and pull them up. And then following up with herbicides. I know we hate herbicides, but in an instance like this again, where they continue to arise in the environment and take space from our natives, since the deer don't eat them, they have no competitors and nobody's controlling these guys. So coming in, following up with maybe a potential herbicide for control, doing basal bark, or remember how we talked about how you can cut them off and just put a couple drops of an herbicide on the cut stem. Therefore, that's a pretty safe way to not spread it throughout the environment. So there you go, Japanese barberry, maybe a plant that is taking over a lot of native habitat, but even worse, it actually alters the biological activity underneath of the plant. And the researchers say that it could take years for the soil to recover underneath of a Japanese barberry. There you go, Berberis thunbergii.